Hi, this is David again. There was quite an overwhelming response to, much more than I expected, to the first video in this series I did about the structure and method for success. And so I'm making this follow-up video for you, which is part two. There was particularly an interest in um, the part of the method. Let me go back here a slide. That had to do with the vision, right, versus goals. Now, the entire structure here, all three parts, are going to be very important. And so in the series that I'll make out of this, which I think will be a series of fairly short videos compared to my long webinars that I've done in the past, um, we definitely want to delve into the entire structure. It's all very important. And remember that this correct structure is going to be in contrast to the sort of expert structure, which I'm just going to put on the screen here. You can pause it just to remind yourself. And one thing I didn't mention in the previous video, of course, there's plenty I didn't mention because I plan to get to many things, but I want to kind of tease something here, or which is this slide here, where there's at least three reasons. I can probably come up with more, but there's three big reasons why the kind of expert method here, the wrong method of you moving towards goals, is wrong and doesn't work. And these reasons are very true and fundamental. And if you think about them, the expert mediocre method is fails at these three things. It kind of assumes these three things away. If you think about it, and I'll explain it in a later video, but I want to kind of tease it so you have a little bit of readiness when I do talk about it. And that is the first thing, the last one I already mentioned in the overview video, which is that the expert method is way too much about you. Which creates all sorts of problems by taking things personally and wanting to, goals get twisted into you wanting to prove that you can do it, or meeting expectations, or when you, another thing I want to talk about is there's an idea about people have, their mind creates about when you deserve to reach a goal, which is really toxic and counterproductive. You never want to think in terms of when you deserve to have a vision or come to fruition or even to achieve a goal. Instead, a goal gets achieved or a vision gets actualized when it does, right? Like, you know, you have enough understanding or you've gotten lucky enough or whatever, and when it comes to fruition, and thinking about whether or not you deserve to have it come true with a certain amount of effort and so forth is very counterproductive, but very normal. It's a very common mistake. That's not even listed on here. But it relates to the kind of you as a central character. Another reason, going from bottom up on the slide, is that you as a person in reality have limited resources, right? You have limited time, limited money, limited relationship capital of things that people will just kind of do for you, right? Because they like you or they owe you something or whatever. And if we look at this expert but mediocre method, it tends to especially when we think about perseverance and focus and so forth, it tends to just say, hey, if you just pour more resources into achieving a goal, then that's better, right? But that ignores the idea of alternative use of limited resources, right? It's always, when you have limited resources, it's always more strategic to take that into account. And you're trying to, in such a situation, it's never about, oh, I automatically, like my automatic tactic is to pour as many resources as I can into a particular result or issue, right? Instead, you're trying to understand, right? If I go to the proper method, then see the first part, seeking understanding, is always going to be critical when you have limited resources, right? Because when you have limited resources, you're trying to apportion them efficiently, right? Your time, your money, etc., your focus. And so how do you apportion resources efficiently? Only by understanding the situation better, right? The better you understand, the better you'll allocate your resources efficiently. So my structure takes into account the clear reality in life that you have limited resources. The expert structure acts as if it doesn't exist. So we know that in that case, I, so to speak, am more right. Now, this isn't about me being right. It's about you having a better method and having a better life, right? And having your visions come to fruition. So the reason I would mention me, quote unquote, or the correct method being right is it benefits you because now you have it and you can use it. But it's important for you to understand why it's right, right? So you take it very seriously. And finally, and I'm just going to touch on this super fast here, is seems versus is. What that means is that we live in reality, right, in the real world. We on Earth, we're dealing with a situation where things seem one way and they're not always the way they seem, right? People can seem trustworthy, end up not being trustworthy in important situations, or they seem untrustworthy, but they're trustworthy. Or a person can seem great or like a jerk and it doesn't turn out that way. Or it seems like a particular goal will make you happy and it doesn't. Or it seems like you won't like something and you end up liking it, right? It seems like you don't want to get out of bed one day and you end up being happy you got out of bed, right? There's just a bazillion things that go on constantly, right? People have all kinds of beliefs that seem right to them that are wrong. They have arguments that seem right to them that are wrong. Their idea of cause is constantly seems one way, such as people constantly feel like if they figure out who to blame, including maybe themselves, then they've kind of solved the problem, right? They figure out who the enemy is. In a lot of situations, that can be their go-to strategy with a lot of things in life. Is like, well, who's at fault? Who's the enemy? Who's to blame? Who's the bad person? And let's get rid of them or attack them or whatever, right? And that's going to make everything better. So there's a bazillion ways in which things seem one way, but they're not the way that they seem. And when we look at the expert mediocre method that I criticize, well, you moving towards a goal and then making adjustments and focusing and following instructions, having positive thinking, I can do it, I'm going in the right direction. That all presupposes constantly, if you take your own time and think it through and try different situations and examples for yourself, which I recommend, then you will be able to see how this expert method critically depends on things being as they seem, right? If I'm going to set a goal and then work on making progress towards it, then that only works if what seems like progress is progress. It only works if the actual goal that I set is going to be something that really gets me ahead, right? The you part of it only works if you're accurate about where you are. And often people will have a sense of what they expect in terms of how long the journey is going to take, how much effort they should put in, how many resources, and any of those things can be wrong, right? But this method presupposes that you can look around, pay attention, and make adjustments based on as you continue your journey. But that only works if what you see is what you get, and that's naive realism. It's naive in general, and it's just flat out not the way the world works. As a matter of fact, we're way more mistaken about, or we're way overconfident about our own judgment, our own knowledge, right, our own beliefs, than every psychological study that measures this sort of thing reports the same thing over and over and over again. Is people are way overconfident in their own abilities, their own ability to see what's there, their own beliefs, etc. Right? Obviously, the easiest way to prove this is talk to someone with different political or religious views, and they're super confident, in their own views, and there's some that might be just clearly wrong, but they're very confident and defensive, right? So those are three things just to kind of tease some future stuff. So let's get on to my kind of lighthearted, clickbaity title. This video obviously is not clickbait, at least not in my own opinion. So when I say 7 easy to follow steps, I'm being lighthearted. I'm kind of joking. However, this will be fairly easy to follow. So without having like a deeper understanding of my whole method and why it's right and why the expert method is wrong, you can still follow the 7 steps in this video now that we're 9 minutes in, and convert a goal into a vision. This will also help you understand a difference between a goal and a vision. In the future, I can get a little bit deeper into why vision is such a better idea, because there's some deeper reasons too. But I want to start with with the kind of shortcut, the kind of easy to follow stuff. Okay. So, and let me try to use examples from both a sort of relationship type example and a sort of career or business money type example. And I do want to say emphatically and clearly that when I talk about a successful marriage and I use that as an example, I'm using it to teach about these concepts. I also, for people that do want to have a marriage that's successful, then my suggestions are going to be helpful. But I want to be clear that I'm not implying that you should get married, that someone who's married is necessarily more successful in relationships than someone who's not, right? The success would be if you're either married or single or wherever in between, that you are achieving something good for you and your situation in that, right? So if you want to get married, then I want you to have a successful marriage, right? And if you want to not, or you're not sure, then want to be successful that way. Okay, but again, I don't mean to imply that someone's better or more successful, of course, if they're married and successfully married. I mention that because that sort of implication is fairly common, and I've heard that it's kind of fairly common by accident, in church groups and communities and so forth, where people that are married are kind of sometimes feel, or people that are unmarried might feel like they're treated as a little bit lesser, not on purpose. It's not like people are necessarily malicious or anything, but just that can kind of creep in. Okay, so to what's on this slide here. Let's use the example actually of if you're dating, okay, not marriage itself at this point, but dating. Then instead of when someone goes into a date, either not having much idea of what their goal is, or having a goal that's about themselves and them getting what they want, which might be getting approval, very commonly, right? That's what people go into a date, wanting approval and signs that more is to come, like more approval is to come, right? And then they might want various actions from the other person. But I think that the kind of subconscious deeper motivation for whatever actions, including getting sex or whatever, would be a sense of approval, right? One way or the other. So instead of it being like kind of a goal of I want this or I want that, right? Or what you want the other person to do, what you want for yourself. And instead of goals kind of inherently involve like a sort of point where you kind of check off the goal and you achieve it, right? Instead of that, in order to create something, turn something into a vision, I want you to picture it like a scenario that you can kind of live in, like that someone experiences. It doesn't have to be you, but an experience scenario where, or experiential, maybe I could say, scenario where that occurs after whatever goal that you first kind of notice, right? The point of noticing a goal is to improve on it, not to like set it or write it down, right? But if you notice your goal is like, well, I hope the person does this, or I hope it goes well, or I hope just I feel like it was a successful date afterward, I'm not sure what that means. Whatever that goal might be, think, all right, so let's suppose it was a successful date. What might happen afterwards, right? Maybe, and it's kind of better to take the focus off of yourself in a lot of cases. So especially in something like a very that really involves other people. But even with like a business, you could imagine customers after they purchase from you telling a friend, "Wow, this is really working," or maybe it's months down the road and they've gotten your product or service, and you're like, "Wow, ever like that product or service." Of course, you can put the actual thing in there that you that's your business, but it's really been wonderful. Like I really want to give this person a testimony. I want to refer people because it just worked great over the last few months since I bought it. I'm so happy with that purchase, right? So picturing that instead of some goal, I know I'm switching around here, but I'll get back to the relationship one. But picturing that instead of like, oh, I want to make $3,000 a month or $10,000 or $20,000 a month, right? Or I want to make 100 sales this month, right? That is not helpful compared to a scenario that occurs after you do such a thing, and that involves, and you see that when I say scenario, right, this is something that's a lived experience by a person, right, where they're remarking this to a friend, let's say, about how happy they've been and how much the product or service has helped them, right? They could, or you could just even picture a customer musing about your product or service and how great it is and how they'd like to refer things and how it's helped them they'd like to refer the product or service, not things, and how much it's helped them. So that's what I mean by moving it to come after the goal point. When it comes to a date, if you imagine the person, so before your date, instead of you can notice what your goals are. Sometimes people don't even stop and think what they want. But instead of like setting them, right, you create or think of a scenario that is experienced by the person that you went on the date with, that happens after the date, where they're like, wow, that was really terrific. Now, to this, I'm going to say something that's going to kind of skip down to the fourth point here, but it just kind of fits in with what I'm saying. So you could also imagine, before you go on a date, you could imagine that it's several months later and the person you went on a date with is like, wow, ever since I went on that first date with a person, it's really been wonderful. But you could remove assumptions where it doesn't have to be the person you're going on a date with if you think about it, right? Like if I'm about to go on a date with a specific person, I can still picture where a person, right? In my case, it would be if I was dating, I've been married for 20 years, but let's suppose I was dating outside of that situation. And it would be a woman, right? I'm heterosexual. So, um, so I would picture perhaps, and using this example, where a woman is saying, "Wow, it's been so great ever since my first date with David, and then we've been together, and it's been wonderful." And I can really imagine, being happy with him, right? And maybe they're talking to a friend, maybe they're just thinking to themselves in their head, maybe they're talking to their parents, whatever it might be, right? But I picture that, but I don't have to have the assumption that it's that person necessarily, right? Because why do that, right? You don't need to assume that. If you're dating, presumably you want to, like, you want to create an overall vision of if you're dating for a good marriage. Of course, you could be dating with other things, but if your vision was of a good marriage, then and you're not married yet, then and you don't know exactly who it might be, then you're in the dating situation, but your vision is about marriage, and you could picture, and it might be helpful to have an idea of a marriage, but you could also picture this kind of intermediate vision of a person who you're not married to, but you've been dating for a while, and they're just really happy about meeting you and how that feels. Okay, by adding how it feels, now we're on point number two about adding experiential goodness, right? So they're feeling good. They're and by when I say add goodness, you can add multiple layers of goodness. So you could imagine someone just the day after your first date being happy and feeling good about meeting you. That's valid. But by putting it forward more into the future and them picturing a number of like a longer term of goodness and how they feel good, but they also like how you guys are creating a vision together and maybe how you've discussed certain things and whatever else they might feel good about. You can stack goodnesses, right? Um, Instances or whatever of goodness in your vision, right? So you can layer it in. So when I say add experiential goodness, you're you're imagining a person feeling good, like experiencing the feeling of good, and then you can layer in a number of reasons why they feel good, and they could be thinking about those reasons and feeling better and better as they imagine each of the additional reasons why they feel good about how they've been dating you for a period of time. You see? So, um, so the point one here is it comes after this goal point, right? Um, And as when I say after, it can also be a more permanent state than just a goal point, right? Of like receiving approval and then check, okay, I've checked that box, I've achieved my goal, right? And now I have another goal, I need the next thing and the next thing. You see, with goals, people always need another fix, right? Because you achieve a goal and now the sugar high goes away really quickly and you want to set and achieve another goal. And so you're in this kind of desperate mode, right? When you're in this case dating, or you can easily apply this to having a business where you're making money, right? You make one sale, then you need more. You make a certain amount of money in a month, and then you want more. Instead of having to have this kind of sugar high and crash, and try to have another sugar high and crash. Of course, I'm using sugar high metaphorically, like another high and crash. Then you can instead picture an ongoing situation where it's not like up and down, up and down, up and down, where you need another fix, which of course is counterproductive, right? If I'm dating, if I'm a guy and I'm dating, and I need another fix all the time of approval for the person I'm dating, then they're going to feel that, right? It's not going to be very attractive, right? I'm going to come across as less confident, more needy, and any relationship guy coach can tell you that obviously coming across as more and more needy is not going to make a woman like you more, right? Just going to make her lose attraction to you. So my scheme here, I'm teaching you about how to convert a goal to a vision, is going to naturally make you more attractive. And if you're looking to make money, then you want you and your product and service and your business to be more attractive, right? I named three things there real quick. Right, your product or service, and kind of your business, right? Your brand, right? You ideally want all three to feel attractive, right? If you feel needy, if you need another fix, which also can mean you need more and more and more customers, more and more money, and you might ignore the customers you have because they've already checked their box, they've bought your product, and so you're not really interested in them by accident because they're not part of your goals anymore, right? I alluded to the same thing happening in a marriage relationship or any relationship, right? Where you get your box checked off and now you're not really interested in them for a little while until you need to get a new box checked off that involves them, right? So you go back to them when you need something and otherwise they don't feel the same from you, right? We've all felt that, right? From people where they only reach out to me when they need something. You see, when you're operating in terms of the proper structure of success and you're operating within a vision, then it's not about you constantly needing a fix or something that you need when you interact with people. And that's going to make you far more effective and attractive to them. And you're going to get, of course, a better response. And to the extent that you're competing with other people, you're going to generally be more attractive than other people who are going to constantly be in this goal mindset. And whether they intend to or not, they're going to constantly, right, be interact with other people in a sort of behaviorist way, where they interact with people when they want something, other people can feel it, and otherwise they'll kind of lose interest until they want something again, right? And so they're kind of rewarding people for giving them what they want, and then ignoring them otherwise, and then trying to reward them again. And it's super easy to outcompete people like that, right? Dating is actually super easy when you have the right structure of understanding things like I'm giving you, because your quote unquote competition is really inept at this very deep level that they're not aware of. They can learn stuff about supposedly how to pick up women or men or how to act, but if their deeper structure is wrong, then they're going to be super easy to like beat out. I'm not really someone who's interested in competing with other people. However, to the extent that you are, then you're only going to just outcompete them. And then it's going to be so easy to outcompete other people that you become much less competitive because it's not really, you don't really have anything to prove anymore. It's just so easy, right? So let's see here. We talked about adding experiential goodness, right? You're stacking layers of goodness. If it's a business of yours and you're imagining a happy customer, right, and they're referring other people, you can imagine other ways and reasons why they're happy with you and how they're benefiting from the product, or how they refer your product to someone else. The other person gets your product, and the other person is telling them, "Thank you for the referral. Wow, it's so wonderful that you told me about this product. I tried it too, and I bought it too, and it's great." You see, so that's layering and stacking more goodness into your vision. Um, And then, oh, I said here, make it an ongoing experience. Okay, I mentioned this a few minutes ago. Instead of it checking a box, you wanted something that's kind of lasting, right? When you're picturing a customer being happy, they're happy on kind of this ongoing basis, right? And they're referring people to you. It's just in your vision, right? They're referring people to you when it comes up on an ongoing basis. Not that all your customers are like waking up in the morning and their first priority is who can I call today to refer your product to, but that when it comes up, right? They mention it and so forth. You might as well envision that. That's only going to be. It might not happen with every one of your customers, of course, but it's a great thing to envision, right? Just like what you envision when it comes to someone being happy after a date with you or after months after dating you, that exact thing might not come to fruition, right? But picturing it can be good, and that's where the removing unnecessary assumptions is helpful. You can picture something kind of specific, but you can also either specifically like actually remove assumptions that you notice that are not helpful, or you can just generally understand that, hey, I'm picturing one thing that's kind of specific, but I mean that more as a metaphor. Whoops. So good. What else can I say about removing unnecessary assumptions? Maybe you're going to learn something and realize something about your product or service, and you're going to improve on it in some critical way. You see, so when you picture someone really liking your product or service, you could say, wait a second, I'm maybe assuming that it's going to be the same and they have to like it the way it is now. How about if I imagine that maybe I I learned, like I sold my product or service, I got some feedback, and I realized, hey, maybe it can be improved, rather than, that I had to believe that it was perfect the way it was, right, and be defensive about it. And so you might imagine that maybe you improved on it and made multiple improvements, even perhaps, and then people are really happy that you did that on top of everything else. You see, so that'd be an example of removing assumptions. Regarding relationships, of course, assumptions can be you want to have a good idea of what's really important to you, but you might have some things that you feel like are important, but you examine them and say, do I really, like if I really met a woman who's terrific, or of course a man, depending on who you're looking for, um, then do they really need this particular quality, or do they really need to do or not do this particular thing? And some things you really do want that, right? So be honest with yourself. There's some things that are going to be tough to change. You might think, oh, if I'd be a better person if I wasn't so shallow, but I'm pretty shallow when it comes to looks and who I want to be married to. I mean, of course, at this point, I want to be married to my actual wife only. And if we get older, that's fine. But if you're shallow or you like certain body parts to be larger or smaller or whatever, um, even if you prefer certain ethnicities or races, if that just really is something that you can't get over, then that's that, right? Um, and so you can take an honest look and say, let me try to do it differently, right? If it's something you feel like is not very helpful or narrows things down for you, or that you just be a better person if you didn't have those things. But if you try and it's not happening, then embrace the way that things are, as long as it's not somehow hurting somebody else, right, or violating them. Okay, so that's some examples of the removing assumptions. Okay, the next two I talk about removing yourself as best you can, and then removing time, distance. Oh, and I mentioned deserving earlier, but then I have it again on this part here. Okay, so um, the um, the totality of this, I'm going to talk about these together, and then I might also distinguish them as well, removing yourself and then removing time. But they kind of go together. When you're in the picture, that's when it's more about like you see when you set a goal, what's going to automatically happen. I noticed this years ago, and I've been working on this whole structure for years and years to try to hone it and get it right. And I've had elements to this before, but I like the way I put it together at this point in my life. Um, so when you have a goal, even if you don't set it intentionally, right? These goals just kind of end up in our minds, right? So whether or not intentional or not, in both cases, your mind immediately creates kind of an overall sense of who you are, where you're at regarding the goal, and the kind of expected journey to your goal, like how much you have to do in order to accomplish your goal. If you want to make a website or a business or meet somebody or have a relationship, work, get married, whatever, there's a sort of expected amount of how much it's supposed to take, how long it's supposed to take you. If you're learning a new skill or if you get like a new app, right, your mind kind of automatically creates a sort of expectation, right? Even if you're listening to a video, there's a sort of expectation of like how long it's supposed to take before you get it, or else you're wasting your time, or you're frustrated with the presenter or yourself, or something's wrong, right? All these negative emotions come from this sense of you, and then the kind of expected journey and amount of time it's supposed to take, what progress is supposed to look like, all of that. And so much of what I've tried to develop with my overall structure of success is finding ways to structure things differently, to understand to have a whole different paradigm and model so that this doesn't happen, right? Because it's so toxic to like, um, so I wrote here clarity versus expectation, all right? So expectations are not necessarily toxic, but what you want to do, you need to have some expectations, especially if you're like collaborating with someone else on something. But what you could do is have a shared vision. But also, if you're working with someone or any kind of transactional situation, even in a marriage, there's things you do expect from the other person and they expect from you. You want to be very clear about what those things are, not apologize for them, but instead have clarity. And also for yourself, you need to be clear about what you want in terms of your vision. So you go from a goal where these expectations are sort of set without you realizing it, right? Or again, even if you come into this very video there's a sort of expectation about how long it should take before you get kind of annoyed or bored or want to click away, right? So you instead that, but you're not going to be clear on those things. They're just going to be kind of this semi-conscious or hardly at all conscious expectation that's sort of beneath the surface of your awareness, but you kind of feel it bubbling up here and there, right? Instead, you want only clarity. And so if there is an expectation that's something that has to be in your vision for it to be your vision, then put it in there on purpose. If your vision is I accomplish this within 6 months or I stop, or I put a certain amount of resource into this and no more, then put that clearly into your vision. Otherwise, don't, right? Or if there's certain things you just really need your spouse, your future spouse, to do or not do, then good, you should have a couple of those things, right? Maybe one to four of things you need them to do, and maybe 1 to 4 things additionally that you need them to not do, right? I really didn't want a wife who nagged me. I did want somebody where I could discuss ideas and they wouldn't get defensive and just give up. And I did want someone that took intimacy seriously and considered that a critical part of marriage. So it's good to have expectations. With zero expectations, you have no vision at all, right? A vision, in a certain sense, literally is your expectations envisioned in an experienced scenario, right? You're trying to manifest those expectations, but you want to be clear with them, right? Again, you want to add goodness, like I put in the second point. You want to remove assumptions, as I put in the fourth point, right? So it's not that you say no expectations. That's illogical, counterproductive, and it gets it wrong. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and it never really works because it's, again, fundamentally illogical. But you want to get the expectations clear and correct, and you can stack layers of goodness. You expect, in a certain sense, more goodness, and remove assumptions that shouldn't be there. Doesn't mean you remove all premises or all expectations. You're adding clarity, right? Adding goodness and removing assumptions is, in both cases, you're adding clarity. You see? So what we don't want to do, unless it's absolutely necessary, is have an issue with time. Now, but this is, once again, really a clarity issue. Sometimes timeliness, it matters. Right? If someone wants to have kids and they're a woman, then they're pretty much going to need to be probably married before they're about 35 or so, right? Realistically, maybe 37. I'm not trying to make a biology claim, right? But just whatever it might be, then and then other things in business, there's a certain time frame, right? Like you might need to make a certain amount of money by some point before you run out. And maybe as you consider that, maybe you also have a job that removes time pressure, but you want clarity, right? You could envision a situation where you have a job and then you steadily, or however quickly or not it happens, you're getting yourself out of your job with your income from your business, right? So clarity with time, remove it whenever possible, just like any assumption, right? Any unhelpful, unnecessary part of your vision or expectation can be removed. But if time is essential for some reason, then you include that, you see? But then you see why it's essential, so it has to be there. And if time is essential, right, a time frame, then that's going to help you prioritize it in terms of your limited resources. Right, you'll pour more resources, which means higher priority, right, on things that are more timely. Ultimately, if something's beyond your control, all you can do to make something happen faster is put like all of your limited resources or all that you might have to spare, right? You can't do anything more than that, so realize that, right? The absolute fastest you can ever do something is all the resources that you have left over after the stuff that you just is non-negotiable for whatever reason, like some amount of sleep, right? And things like that. Some amount of money, maybe a certain amount of time for people that are important to us, right? And then the rest of the resources could be put into something that is timely. I'm not saying that you do pour all your resources into one thing. I'm saying that understand with time that it really is only a matter of resources. You can't further will reality to happen faster or a goal or a vision to come to fruition faster than simply putting all available resources into it. Once you're doing that, then you've got to let go at that point. There's nothing more you can do. I said in number 5 here, removing yourself as best you can. What you want to do is kind of, in a certain sense, identify with a vision. Identify with like imagine a good scenario, right? In the situation with where we imagine your customer being happy, even months after getting your product and service, then you're not in there. You don't really have to be, right? You're sort of in there a little bit. They got your product or service. You don't have to be like completely out, right? You're going to relate to the vision in some way because you're the one trying to bring it to fruition. And ultimately, you're participating in the goodness of it being brought to fruition. But we want to be really careful because when it comes to goals, our mind is constantly going to twist what we think our goal is or what our goal allegedly is. It's going to twist it into a goal about you proving that you're good enough and moral enough and competent enough, right? We can see this because when that's threatened, people abandon their goal, like if they're working on a business project, and then someone says something that questions someone's competence or moral goodness, that there's not living up to a certain moral standard, like they should have done something and they didn't, right? The word should is very morally laden. Then what do people often do? They take their eye off the actual project, right, goal that they're doing, and it becomes about them and the other person and being upset or defensive or figuring out whether the person is right or that sort of thing. Great. So regarding number 5, the way to represent this for yourself, to kind of, if you're making notes and you want to write it down, then you want to be vigilant about not having things twisted to make it about whether you're achieving the goal well enough. Instead, and by having it be a vision where you're not like in the center, then that makes it a lot easier for the twisting to be avoided. Okay, and the final thing I'll say here as I close out this video, I say integrate, and then if applicable, collaborate. So the integrate part means this, is that you can actually create one integrated vision that encompasses most everything that you want out of life. For example, you can imagine not having to worry about money, and imagine yourself in a scenario, right? Not just the words, but picture a scenario in the future and you could be sitting on a couch, you could be walking down in a sidewalk, just musing, you could be talking to a friend, whatever it is, but you could just notice yourself not worrying about money. Doesn't mean you can buy 10 private jets, right? Whatever, not worrying about money doesn't mean you can buy anything and everything you want. No one hasn't, right? That's just not going to happen, right? Elon Musk can't buy everything, right? So not worrying about money, having peace of mind in general, and having harmony in your relationships, right? And any critical, I talked about clarity already, anything critical going on with relationships that you are quite certain you want, then you can imagine that being the case. And you can imagine how that stuff is in balance in your life, is in balance, right? So with goals, they tend to start conflicting and they're isolated from each other, and people kind of bounce back and forth and they feel overwhelmed. They feel, right, when goals start to kind of pile up and conflict, then people feel the sense of overwhelm, right? You can instead, when you're dealing in the realm of vision, you can start to put things together, because you can imagine yourself in a moment that you're kind of living in where you feel good about money and your relationships and so forth, but then you can kind of look around in your life, like in that vision, and think, okay, well, what's going on? Okay, I spend a certain amount of time in my various relationships, and it's a nice time, right? And I spend a certain amount of time working on my business or career situation, or I'm retired, right? Maybe there's just money in my bank account, right, that's earning me money, or obviously like simply whatever investments, right? Where no one just puts money under their mattress in most cases, or most people don't. You can at least get some interest and so forth. So again, you can with a vision, it's the nature of a vision is that it's integratable. Goals are more like these little points that just kind of conflict and confuse and interfere with each other. And it's kind of hard to integrate them because to integrate them is to work them into a proper vision, right? That essentially is how you would integrate goals if you were going to integrate them, is incorporate them into an integrated vision. Okay, and then the nature of a vision, similarly, is that you can collaborate with other people. You can't really collaborate on goals. You just sort of impose goals on people, right? Like you can imagine um, a person in a business situation or corporate setting saying, "Here's what our goals are," right? And they're like, "These are our goals," and they're basically just telling you their goals, right? That's the kind of the nature of goals. Same thing with like relationships, right? Relationship goals. Um, a vision, however, and you can do this explicitly, right? If I was dating now, I'd be looking for someone, and I was at the time too, and it was wonderful. But I would be looking for someone where pretty early on we're discussing a shared vision, and in a fun way that feels good. It's lighthearted, right? When you're dating, you don't want to be overly serious. So I don't mean that you're like super serious doing this, but in a lighthearted, enjoyable way, you could be collaborating on a vision with somebody else. And you don't always have to collaborate where they're on purpose collaborating with you. You can kind of paint a picture, like a mental picture that involves them or you, the two of you, and just see what they think and how they react, right? And if they don't seem to care much or doesn't juice them, then you might want to poke around with other, like adjust the vision and change your painting until they like it, right? So you can do a lot of the painting yourself, but it can be collaborative because you're looking for what they react to and what juices them. And as you paint it, it gets in their mind too, right? And then you can share a vision. So you don't need to have it be like where they're like, all right, I'm going to share a vision with you and we're going to work on it together right now. Right? It doesn't have to be like that necessarily. It could, but it could also be where you're painting different pictures, poking and prodding, seeing what when their eyes light up and when they like it, right? And kind of future pacing that, right? Where you're kind of painting a vision of the future. It's called future pacing in neurolinguistic programming. It's very helpful for sales, very helpful in a relationship. If you're a guy and you're dating a girl and she's like, I just can't see us together, right? What does that mean? It means there aren't pictures in her mind of you, the two of you being together where she feels good. You don't need to have a serious conversation where she's saying, oh yeah, this is what I want, this is what I envision. Instead, you can paint the picture in a way that she is into, right? She likes. And that's attractive as a guy, right? Girls tend to like it if a guy kind of surrounds them with a nice box that they can be happy within, right? Um, like kind of like a conceptual box, right? Or just painting a picture where you're kind of helping to create the overall frame, right? Individuals can vary, of course. Individual girls and guys can be different, but girls tend to like that and find that attractive in a guy. It's tends to be what girls like in a guy is the overall box of how it feels to be with them, whereas guys are more like they want someone that they're looking at inside of the box and they like how the person kind of looks and acts inside the box. Sorry, my screen went out. Okay, just from the screensaver. All right, that's wonderful. So we've gotten through this, and I'll continue in the next video. And I appreciate your feedback and comments, questions, etc.